but you feel a little more unsafe as a Black person navigating the world with these constant images coming. But at the same time, they need to be shared. People need to know that this is happening to us,
They
right?
do. They do. And I feel like just as much as it's important to know, it's just as much important to distance yourself from that information when you're not ready to receive it. Um,
100%.
because imagine you just heard the worst news of your life and then you hear that on top of it. It's like people also have to take note of their own personal well-being. And I think sometimes unsubscribing from things that show you the same things over and over, because just as much of that is out there, there are other things. There's always something to be worried about. There's always something to fear. And I feel like part of that goes along with like a little bit with like ignorance is bliss. Sometimes not knowing is better than knowing. My name is Khadijah Lashaun, and I am the Black guidance counselor that my community needs. I'm a strategic investor and CEO. I make money in my sleep, and I teach others how to do the same. I share my knowledge, talents, and resources with others. So if you're in need of that motivation or courage to start following your own path, look no further. My intention is to share as much value with you all as possible and to show you that there are many different paths to happiness and many different paths to wealth. You just have to find the one that's right for you. Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Hello, everyone. My name is Khadijah Lashaun, also known as your Black guidance counselor. I'm here to guide you to the resources that you need. Today, I have a very special guest with me. Her name, she goes by is it the Happy Black Therapist?
Yeah, my
Yes.
name's Chantel, but my IG handle is the Happy Black Therapist.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So when I
Thank
first
you.
came across your platform, I was just immediately like, oh, let me look into this. Let me see what's going on here. Because I love to see us and I love to see us spreading what we have to offer and our gifts and stuff like that. So thank you so much for coming on. I do have one question for you, just so everybody knows, who are you and what type of services, like what do you provide?
Well, my name is Chantel Guadima. I'm a first generation Nigerian American and I'm a therapist. I've been heavily trained in trauma. I'm not trauma certified, but I've been trained in trauma, and that's pretty much been the kind of the extent of my therapy career has been working with primarily children who have been dealing with various chronic or just circumstantial traumatic events. So now I've transitioned into private practice and working with a bigger demographic. So not just kids, but adults as well. And yeah, that's been pretty much me. I've been doing therapy now since 2016, but I have been in the behavioral and mental health field since 2012. So it's been a while.
Wow, that's a long time. So what led you into that direction and how did you know that that was the path for you?
Well, in college, I kind of, I tried to study other things and I wasn't really into it. And I did know that I had my own like mental health struggles when I was in college. And I had a psychiatrist who provided me therapy. For those people who don't know, psychiatrists prescribe medication. Therapist does, intensive treatment through talk therapy and other modalities. So I had a psychiatrist who did both. They prescribed medication and provided me with therapy. And I mean, she really pulled me out of a dark place. She was a medical student. And I don't know, I was just in awe of her. I felt like the work she was doing was powerful with me. And that experience, I think it went on for about 4 months. It was pretty short-lived, but that experience always really resonated with me. And then shortly after that, I changed my major, and the rest is kind of history.
Okay, that's awesome. I mean, that's awesome that someone was able to make such a difference in your life, like that probably sparked it in you that like, wow, I want to do this for someone else. Like you did this for me, so I could do it for other
Yeah,
people. So that's
yeah,
awesome. And it's definitely work that is heavily needed in especially in the Black community, because I
yeah,
feel like it's something where there's a lot of just anxiety and fear and like not willing to talk about anything, which is generational. But
yes.
let me ask you something about that. As a child, what type of personality did you have, and how does that relate to who you are, like what you're doing now?
Man, it's so interesting you bring that up because really being Nigerian American, I think that Black Americans here in America, in my opinion, I feel like are a little more advanced when it comes to mental health. They're a little more open
Mm,
versus, you know, um, in my family, this was not something you did, right? I remember in high school, I went to just the school therapist, because I was kind of having just some normal coming of age stuff that I just kind of needed more assistance with. And it was a big thing in my house that I went and spoke to this person.
mm,
Um, Therapy is an absolute no. And it's not so much a no as in it's kind of like, you know, there's all this struggle that Black people have to go through. This is the least of our concerns, was kind of my upbringing around therapy. Like, are you kidding me? Like everything else we're dealing with. And so mental health, at least in my household, was not really promoted or celebrated. And I think um, in the Nigerian community, maybe not the Nigerian American community, but in the actual Nigerian community, it's not something that's extremely promoted. And to some extent, I kind of understand because when you look at people outside of this country, they have a lot of things going on, right? And so they have that mentality of this is the least of our concerns. And while to some extent, okay, yeah, I agree, but your mental health is going to catch up with you no matter what part of the world you live in, right? It's going to catch up to
absolutely.
you. It's going to have its say. So for me, when I decided to become a therapist, my family was not happy about it. They didn't understand it. My parents are immigrants, so it was very much a concern of how will you support yourself, and they had no frame of reference around it. They didn't even see it as, a part of the medical field.
Mm,
So they were really, really kind of lost. But I was always kind of I always had a sad temperament as a child. I always kind of was more down, very, very afraid, kind of lacked a lot of confidence. And I just got to the point where I was tired of it. I didn't want to live that way forever. And I had my own traumas growing up that I dealt with. And I kind of recognized early on, like maybe that wasn't supposed to happen. And maybe that's bothering me today.
mm,
Um, so I always had an interest in seeking help um, from a very young age. I remember being like 14, going to the school therapist. Just on my own, I was kind of like, I know I don't feel good. I know I need to do something about it. So
hmm. And I'm sure like a lot of that probably had to do with like just having a different culture in the home versus what you're seeing when you go out into the school, like, and to do that for so many years where you're just like at home, it's like this, and you can't even talk about what's going on out there at home because it's not really.
the immigrant struggle, and I say struggle because there's certain aspects of it where it's just, if you come from an immigrant home, it is like night and day, but it is a beautiful experience. I mean, you really do have a robust culture,
Mhm,
especially being a Black person, where, when you think about African culture versus Black American culture. Black American culture is a lot newer, right? And
Mhm.
so it's kind of like you have the best of both worlds. So it can be a very beautiful experience. But when I tell you, you are literally just tiptoeing in two worlds, it
Mhm.
is it is interesting. And it's funny because you can see, for one thing, you can see the overlap between the two cultures. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting. We have our own version of the cookout, and then at the same time you're also invited to the cookout. It's very interesting, um, being in essentially two Black cultures. It's a eye-opening experience, and I'm really grateful for it, honestly. I kind
Yeah.
of I love that part about myself.
That's definitely a blessing to have, to be able to straddle both sides and to be exposed to both sides. And I'm sure as you grow and your family grows, even on maybe in America and in Nigeria, like it blends even more where you're getting even different things, you know.
It it is. I mean, it really is. It's interesting how connected you can be to such a shared experience. I mean, Africa is like a shared experience, I think,
Mhm.
of all of us, whether you kind of want to admit it or not, of everybody, honestly, whether you're Black or not, if we're just being honest. But
Mhm.
I think being so closely connected to it, and then also having this whole other culture that you can celebrate is powerful. But I mean, like I said, it comes with its own struggles of going to school and existing in one world and then coming home and being in a completely different world. I mean,
Mhm.
it can create some chaos as well.
I believe it. And I just wanted to put a little side note. I'm someone who I always felt like I didn't really have a culture, like when we would have those like international days or whatever it was at school, I really didn't have anything I could bring forward because I'm from a blended family, and it's like we're not really that close with any parts of my family, if that makes sense. So the thing about that is that when I went to college, I got a lot of exposure to different cultural groups that we had. Like we had one group called Africa's Legacy on our campus, and I used to sing like the songs that they would do, and they would have the dancing and the makeup, and it was just really in the dresses and the food. Like it was just really cool to like be immersed in a completely different culture. I feel like we need more of that, because then you realize it's not really that much difference between all of us. Like we have different customs and norms, but it's a lot of similarities, like a
There
lot.
are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of similarities in child rearing. I mean, it's very interesting when I hear my Black American friends talk about something growing up, and I'd be like, "Y'all do that too?" Like, it is interesting. There's a connection there. So yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Who do you think influenced you most when you were like as a child growing up? Like who would you say
Oh,
impacted your life the most?
oh my goodness, that's a big question. You know what? I kind of think my grandmother. I never met her. Um, she died shortly before I was born. But she's just a very interesting figure in my family. She had a very difficult life. I think she was first married when she was like 15. And this is rural Nigeria back in the day, and
Mhm.
she was married into a polygamous family, and her husband passed away. She was remarried almost immediately. It was her story is so interesting. And then from there, she had 7 children, raised them all herself. And to begin with, she was orphaned. She was taking care of her brother. I mean, she went through so much struggle, and through all this, she never learned how to read. She was illiterate pretty much all of her life.
Wow.
Um, and, growing up, I think that's kind of why education became important to me. I remember my mom, when I was very, very little, education, like I didn't really grasp education as most kids didn't. You just knew like go to school and behave. And then my mom shared this with me about my grandmother and how she never, when she died, the only thing she could spell was her first name. And I don't know why that was so impactful to me. I think it's just to be that little and hear that an adult can't read or write at the time was just so like, wow, I've never known an adult to not be able to communicate in that way at that point in my life, and to know that she's so closely related to me. She's like one generation off,
Yeah.
was just very impactful. And my mom, she was kind of like, that's why education's so important to me. That's why I'm constantly stressing out about getting good grades and this and that. And I don't know what, so that just, that conversation really resonated with me. And ever since then, I've made education a big focal point in my life, and not just, formal education. I think as, a person of color, it's important to get various forms of education. um,
Especially about the history,
yeah,
the history. So many stories
exactly,
are told, I completely
exactly.
understand. And I was gonna say, it's kind of like your grandma brought the baton as far as she could. Even though she was illiterate, she still raised all seven of her kids. And y'all
Yeah,
are in America.
absolutely. I mean, I think, all of her children are a testament to her, to this
Absolutely.
story, because they're all, in my opinion, all my, my mom, my aunts, uncles, they're all, in my opinion, successful people, so I think her story is a testament. And just like, it's just little things about her, like learning, there's obviously through, conversion and all that, there's a missionary presence, there's a huge Christian presence
Mhm.
in Nigeria. And just knowing, like, for example, she wasn't for a long part of her life. That was not her faith. She
Mm.
was very much into, African spirituality,
Yeah.
and just little things like she was, I don't know, I don't know her, I don't know her personally, but she just seemed like a powerhouse of a woman, and you just got that
Wow.
sense of her. So
Wow. She sounds like a powerful woman. Powerful woman
yeah.
right there. Okay. How did the becoming a therapist, what steps did you have to take to go in that
Sure.
direction?
Well, so I'm from Arizona. So for those of you who are listening who are from Arizona, I'm a bit of a house divided. We have our two rival schools, the University of Arizona, and Arizona State University. I definitely went to both.
Okay.
I went to the University of Arizona for about 3.5, 4 years, bear down, for those of you know what that means, and had a great time, maybe a little too great, because then I had to transfer to Arizona State
Oh
University.
no.
This was to get my bachelor's degree, but that's where I got my bachelor's degree from. And both schools are such great schools. I had great experiences at both. Um, and so I majored in psychology, which most people have. I mean, there's other routes you can go. There's forensics, there's criminal justice, but for me, psychology just really resonated with me. That's what I felt most comfortable majoring in when I finally figured out what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And then I took about a year off because I immediately, like 2 days after graduation, got a job at an amazing company. It's a local mental health clinic here in Ahwatukee in Phoenix, Arizona, called Child and Family Support Services. And I was there for 8.5 years. I loved that place. The
Wow.
culture there was really positive. The work we did with families, with children and their families, just changed me as a person as well as my career forever. So I got a
Wow.
job there immediately, and then took a year off, and then went to grad school at Grand Canyon University. And that took about, the program I did was professional counseling. Now, for those of you who are very interested in someday you see yourself as a therapist, psychologist, whatever this looks like, one thing I will tell you, so I did the professional counseling program, and various schools have accredited counseling programs. However, I recommend you do social work, Because social work, it's not just about child welfare. So I know people hear social worker and they think like, oh, people, CPS, Child Protective Services. That is not just what social work does. Social workers are actually therapists. They can be therapists. Their credentials allow them to provide therapy.
Wow.
Um, and so you have a lot of options with social work. And the reason why I say social work over professional counseling is because it's more marketable,
Mm,
a little easier. So I, so that's what, if I had to give anybody a recommendation who's getting into this field, I think social work is a great route. Not that I don't love professional counseling, but at the end of the day, you're doing the exact same thing. It doesn't matter. It's just one is more marketable than the
that
other.
makes
But
sense.
yeah.
But can you get licensed after you get your grad degree? So,
Mhm.
would you be a licensed social worker or a licensed?
You'd be a licensed social worker. You'd be
Okay,
a and there's no difference. There's no difference.
okay,
I learned that a little late on. I probably would have been a social worker, honestly. There's really no difference, but, I do think that, for those who specifically wanna get into this field and want this end goal,
mhm,
just an FYI, social work is a little more marketable.
okay,
But yeah, grad school was about 3.5 years, and after that, to be licensed as a under professional counseling, under counseling, not social work, there was a big test I had to do,
mm.
that was like, those board tests. It was like 5 hours and intimidating and awful, but once it's passed, and then I got licensed.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that. I know I'm way late, but congrats.
I'll take
'Cause
it. That
that's
was a hard
I believe
test.
it. I believe it. And honestly, I majored in psychology in my undergrad, and I know after that I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like I just didn't see myself in the specific routes that the psychology major took me, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. But I can hear what you're saying about the social work. For
Yeah.
anybody listening, you can have your own social work practice, can't you? Like once you get licensed.
It's literally no different than the professional counseling. You can have
Okay.
your own practice. It's nothing. I think where it comes into play is like a lot more hospitals hire social workers for different things.
Mm.
A lot more like established entities hire social workers for different things. So it's just a little more marketable. I think it's more global too. Like the credentials, like in Canada for social work, aren't like super different than the United States.
Okay.
Um, my cousin was telling me that today. She's a social worker in Canada.
Hmm.
It's just a little more marketable. And once you go through the process, you're like, going through grad school looking for a program, you're going to hear that anyways. I'm not going to be the first person to tell you that.
Okay.
So,
That makes sense. You said you started your own private practice. What made
mhm.
you go in that route, and what's the difference between having your own private practice versus like working for someone else?
Sure, sure. So, what made me go into this route, it's really interesting. So, it didn't start off as a private practice. It actually was like a behavioral health residential facility.
Mm,
Um, and it took inpatient clients in. And so it wasn't a private practice, it was more of an inpatient situation. And we were doing that and we were doing really well. And that work was really exciting to me. It was new. We opened that in 2019.
mhm,
Um, and then I got to the point where I kind of wanted to quit my day job because it was really doing well. And I wanted to start being like, a working practitioner
mm,
in the inpatient, because before that, I wasn't able to provide therapy there. I wasn't able because it's just different. It's kind of how our system is set up here.
mm.
So once
I'm
I decided I kinda oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. For the inpatient, what do you mean by that?
Oh,
Um,
I'm so sorry. So inpatient, like, instead of just coming to someone's office doing an hour therapy and leaving, that's outpatient.
okay.
Inpatient is kind of like you stay there,
And
right? You
y'all
stay
and y'all okay. Takes a lot of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, yeah, you stay there overnight, maybe 3 to 6 months at a time.
Okay.
So we opened that facility and it was doing really well. But I, like any entrepreneur, I still had my day job that I had to go to. So I would just be there kind of on the weekends, hanging out with client, not really doing much. I wasn't a practitioner
Mm,
there because I wasn't credentialed to do that. And again, I still had a whole nother day, 50-hour a week job doing therapy at a clinic. So in about like December 2020, I made the decision I'm going to go ahead and leave my day job because I felt like I was at a place where the facility needed me full time. And I started working in the facility full time administratively, right?
mm,
And I did that for a while. And I was kind of like, I'm not at this point, like I'm not doing I'm not doing therapy, which is not comfortable, like it's just kind of like I'm not an administrative, I don't want to do paperwork all day, basically.
mm.
So I started taking the steps through my board, the governing board who oversees behavioral health examiners in my state, to turn it into what we call a supervised private practice.
Okay.
Um, Basically, that means at my level of license, I can't just open a private practice and start. Just means I need to have someone who has a higher license than me oversee the work I do.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I found someone, I hired them, and I just started going through that process. And then in May of last year, we became a supervised private practice, and I
Okay.
opened it up to outpatient. So people who weren't coming to stay, just people who just wanted to do, I just need once a week, once every other week therapy. And that outpatient situation blew up fast.
Wow.
Yeah, I did not expect that. But I, when I look back, I think it makes sense given like the pandemic and everything. I mean, we've all globally gone through a trauma. So it makes sense there'd be such an influx in services needed right now. And so that part of the company I've been attached to since then, just doing outpatient therapy. And that's kind of where we got to today.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm at now, and I've really enjoyed it. I love it. I loved working in the clinic and doing the community-based work. I felt like that was really powerful, and it definitely prepared me for the work I do in private practice. But I do love working with different demographics, different situations. It's different when you're working in the clinics because it's more state Medicaid versus private practice. I wouldn't say one is better than the other for sure. It's just different. And I think it's positive differences.
Hmm. You know, it's interesting because as you're speaking and as you're talking, I can feel the passion in your voice. I can tell how much, it means to you that you're helping these people in a way that feels more aligned with what, the life that you want to live. Because I get the whole not wanting to stay in the inpatient all the time and not really being in the work and helping people one on one. So I get you with that. And it kind of brings me back to what you were saying about your grandma, and I just feel like, you know, there was something someone said that resonated with me. It's like, not every person is going to impact a million people, but
Mhm.
that person could impact the 7 people who impact a million people, like just by having birth or raising the people who are going to impact the rest of the world. So I feel very good that you're doing the work that you're doing. And I feel like
Yeah,
it feels aligned, for you at least. So that's
thank
good.
you.
That's really good. As far as being a woman of color, after you graduated college and you got your licensing and everything, do you feel like it was hard for you to get into the work field as in this field as a woman of color? Like, do you feel like that had any impact?
You know what's so sad is no, I feel like I'm more requested because I am a therapist of color and
Okay.
I'm a female. And I don't know if it's sad. It just feels like the common thing I get is we can't find a practitioner of color all the
Mm,
time, which is kind of like heartbreaking to me. It's like because, and don't get me wrong, I have worked with some amazing clinicians of every color, honestly,
Mhm.
that are so skilled. My current clinical supervisor is not a person of color, and when I tell you his skill set, I only hope someday. But it's it's something about having someone who looks like you, that when you share an issue, it can resonate with them in a very different way, and a shared experience just makes a therapeutic space more comfortable.
Mhm.
Um, especially I think for kids too, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Um, and just we have our own set of issues. And I think Black women in particular have our own set of specific issues that it's kind of like that I just would not talk to my non-Black female friends. Like I wouldn't discuss it with them because it just would not make sense.
Mhm.
Um, so in a therapeutic space, if those issues are popping up in your life in a way that they're causing you distress, they're affecting your quality of life, you want to talk to someone who it makes sense to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Um, the need is so high, I believe, right now. I mean, if I'm being honest, not to toot my own horn, I'm booked and busy, and it's because, well, I was trying to find someone of color, but no one got back to me. I can't seem to find anyone of color. I think it's kind of, I mean, that is the feedback I consistently get, is that people want more practitioners of color.
That makes sense. That makes complete sense. How does entrepreneurship come into play as a mental health practitioner?
The same way it would any other industry. I mean, it's all you.
Mm.
Right now, I'm in the process of getting independently licensed. I'm hoping that will happen next month, so that way I can be kind of what my clinical supervisor is to other people.
Mhm.
And at that point, I'd like to hire another therapist, because it really is. It's like any other
It's
field.
all
It's
you. You gotta show up.
it really is all you.
Yeah.
Um, and so right now I am every department. I'm accounting, I'm HR, I'm clinical, everything.
Mhm.
I'm very fortunate. I rent great office space that comes with a bunch of amazing amenities. They even give you a receptionist.
Okay.
Um, so that's helpful. But other than that, it's a one woman show. And,
Yeah.
I left my 9 to 5 job to pursue this big entrepreneurship dream. And I went from working like 50 hours a week to all the time. So it's not, it was very different in my head. And I could see it in the wall. Like I could see it on the walls when I was first starting out. And I was like, this is taking up all of my free time. And then
Mhm.
it didn't stop. And I thought it would be better when I was finally able to leave my day job and do this full time, but no, it's not better.
Well, you definitely gotta take care of you, because they need you. And they go and tell you how much they need you. I'm sure they be calling your phone.
That is one thing I'm trying to do better at. That's a big theme for me. May, for those who don't know, is actually Mental Health Awareness Month.
Mm.
So I've been talking a lot about rest and self care, and how to not make self care so ceremonious with like crystals and meditation gong and special bubble bath and all this stuff, but just like simple things, like instead of a client no shows, I'm working on notes and treatment, doing all these different things, rather instead maybe just take a 20-minute power nap and just recharge for my next session. um,
Mhm.
Really taking very simple steps to incorporate self-care, so I definitely need to get better.
It's okay. We all working on it. It's an ever growing process. But let me ask you this. If someone came to you and they just wanted to know, like, how do I know when it's time for me to talk to someone? How do I know when it's time to seek professional help?
Sure. I think the big thing you have to look at is your quality of life. Um, and that's the thing. It's not a big deal until it's a big deal, right?
Hmm.
But along the way, you saw like I'm not living how I was living before, right? So a lot of times people will say, well, I feel depressed. Right, and I'll ask, "What does that look like?" "I'm sad all the time." Okay, well, being sad isn't a bad thing, especially if you're going through something hard, that's normal, like, it's okay to be sad, w you know, however, if you're sad and your appetite has changed drastically, you cannot stop eating or you're overeating or you're
Hmm.
undereating, right? You don't wanna eat anything, or, you're sleeping 13 hours a day, or you haven't bathed in 2 weeks, or you can't, and on the opposite side of that, right? You can't stop. You're taking 5 showers a day because you just don't feel clean, or you have all this energy that you think is great, but all you've done is rearrange your house and you can't find anything, or
Hmm.
you're talking faster at work and people around you are starting to notice when it's starting to impact your ability to function, right? Yeah, that's when it's probably a problem when you're feeling that discomfort. Should you go sooner? Absolutely. Personally, I'm of the belief, and for those of you who are in grad school, forgive me right now. I can't think of my people, but there's a psychological theorist who, there's a belief in psychology of therapy should be ongoing, right?
Hmm.
And to some extent, I believe that. I think it's something that you use to manage, your thinking, your behavior. It can be a great tool. However, in this day and age, and access to services, inflation, everything, healthcare,
Yeah.
um, it's not realistic all the time, right? And so I think if you're down to the wire and you're kind of like, this isn't something that I can just easily incorporate into my life for the next 10 years, focus on, if it's impacting your ability to function, if it's impacting your quality of life. It may not be a big deal, but everybody deserves to be happy, right? Everyone deserves to just generally be content and feel okay with themselves, right?
Hmm.
And if whatever's going on with you is interfering with that, you might want to look into getting some more support, some professional support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure you're not the only therapist who's had to get the extra help too, because, you got to take care of you just as much as you need to take care of the people who help you. I mean, who need your help. So I completely understand. Can we talk through a little bit what's going on, what just happened in New York and how that like seeing a cycle of violence towards our people, especially black people, affects our day-to-day life and our own mental health status?
Yeah, absolutely. I made a post about, oh, I can't remember. I didn't make it. I think I just reposted it about like sometimes being black is about seeing other black people um be murdered in the media, and you have to figure out if you're going to be really emotional about it and speak out against it, or be numb to it and say nothing and just move about your day. It's kind of like an emotional war. Whether you're out there marching on the streets, you're behind a computer doing some activism online, or you just haven't said a word about you, I fundamentally believe it affects every Black person in a negative way. Um,
Hmm.
you know, it it creates fear. I don't care what anyone says. It creates fear, and it's traumatic to see someone be so easily, attacked, murdered for something. The one thing for a fact you share with them.
Mm.
You don't know this person. These victims, I don't know anything about them. People are starting to now kind of post their stories and put faces to names. I don't know anything about any of them.
Hmm.
All I know is that they are Black like me. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that creates fear. And with all the victims of all the victims of violence, as far as hate crimes go, black hate, it's kind of that's really all you have in common with them when you think about it. I mean, I'm sure you do, but on first onset, that's it. That's all. That's the only connection you have with them, and it's something that's so shared. So there's no way you can't not look at that and think that could have been me,
Mm.
right? Especially in a situation like this, they're going into a black, this person went into a black neighborhood. You could have been on vacation in New York visiting a relative who happens to live in, a predominantly black neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I could have, summer's coming up. I could have sent my child to a family member to New York, right? To go stay with that family member who happens to live in a black, like there's no, and strictly because they're black, they're targeted. And so when you see that over and over and over and over again through the media, it just creates this level of discomfort. And there is a mental exhaustion about it. I am mentally exhausted with seeing Black lives taken because they are Black lives.
Yeah.
It is wearing. It is wearing and it's traumatic. I mean, it just there is no way to fully feel, and don't get me wrong, like the world is a crazy place today. You can't really totally feel safe no matter who you are, but you feel a little more unsafe as a black person navigating the world with these constant images coming. But at the same time, they need to be shared. People need to know that this is happening to us,
They
right?
do. They do. And I feel like just as much as it's important to know, it's just as much important to distance yourself from that information when you're not ready to receive it. Um,
100%.
because imagine you just heard the worst news of your life and then you hear that on top of it. It's like people also have to take note of their own personal well-being. And I think sometimes unsubscribing from things that show you the same things over and over, because just as much of that is out there, there are other things. There's always something to be worried about. There's always something to fear. And I feel like part of that goes along with like a little bit with like ignorance is bliss. Sometimes not knowing is better than knowing, because
Absolutely.
we all know. We all
Yeah,
know at this point.
yeah.
We know what's going on, and if you think about it, it's really a mental warfare more than anything else, because it's our mind. We repeat the same things over and over to ourselves. So if we keep seeing the same things, it must be real, and it is. But sometimes it's just
It
better not to know. As far as I'm concerned, I feel like sometimes I don't want to know.
I mean, on it, but if you think about the frequency in which these things and the type of coverage it gets, which it deserves, right? Like it needs to be blown up. And you're seeing it everywhere. I mean, like I think it goes without saying George Floyd, I mean, that was oh my God, it was never ending. And like for me, when that happened, I was just like exhausted because I think I had seen, they had that video of that poor man dying just everywhere. And I think I saw it on
Everywhere.
the news. I was helping I think I was at my mother's house helping her cook, and I just went over to the TV and I literally just saw a man die on national television. And I'm like, when I tell you, like, I was just the exhaustion that came with seeing that. And then it was like everything about it was in my feed. And then like getting messages from people, like non-black people who are like, "Hey, are you okay?" It was a lot. And it was
Yeah.
just like, man, like it just felt fearful. And I know I can't be the only person who felt that way. And it's not necessarily that some people don't want to go out and really support the cause. It's just, you know, you go out, you support the cause, you do what you can, and then something else happens. And it's like, oh my, like,
Yeah.
and the trauma of that, putting your all into wanting to do better for your community, and then something else happens. It's a lot. It's I think every time it's a bit of a grieving process, whether you're out there in the streets, whether you're just one to not comment, it's a lot. And I know for me, I wanted to talk about this today because I think that, for Black mental health, this is a part of our mental health for us.
Mhm.
It just is. Um, Whether you want to accept it or not. And I think in the movement with all of this, that's something that sometimes gets neglected because it's so with the police brutality and then random acts of violence like this, it's just we're so focused on how do we protect our community? How do we protect our community? Which is understandable because we're being killed.
Yeah.
But then also, how do we protect our mental health? Because this is a lot. This is a lot. You can see it too when you think about older generations, civil rights, people who are in older generations and had to fight those battles, a part of the civil rights and Jim Crow. You can see the way they conduct themselves when they're older. You can tell that was mentally draining for them. That's
Yeah.
gonna be us in another 20, 30 years. We're gonna be like, all right, like that's gonna be us because it's like a cycle. Like, where does it stop? And granted, are we where we were before? No, but we're at a place where now, you'd read the newspaper before and you'd see that, and then you'd link up with whoever and try to connect to go, engage in activism. Now you cannot escape it.
Yeah. And I think honestly, to me, the silver lining is that people are waking up who are not Black. They're waking up to what's really going on and what has been going on for as long as we've been shouting at the top of the mountain, telling people what's going on for years and years, generations and generations. And finally, people are starting to wake up and want to make a change about it. But I think focusing more on like solutions. I feel like honestly, the government needs to get involved with every situation that occurs. Like, not the local police necessarily, like the FBI. Like, they need to be, because I recall not too long ago, there was a quote that said, like, white supremacists are the number one most dangerous group of people, population. But the truth is they're dying off, they're dying off because the people who hold those ideals, they're trying to pass it on and try to keep, whites only, if that makes sense, like keep it all within a white family. And the thing is, we're blending. Things are blending. It's becoming a melting pot. So I feel like things, to me, I want to hope that things get better. I want to hope that we aren't seeing these same images over and over again, and that some real changes happen to
Mhm.
to keep it from happening over and over again, like real punishment, not getting let
Yeah.
off every time.
No, I mean, it doesn't make sense to sit here and be like, it's a never ending problem and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. Well, that's going to just crush our spirit as a community as a whole.
Absolutely.
I do want to believe it'll get better because, I have a Black child. I'm going to have more Black children.
Hmm.
I need to ensure that it's going to get better. So I have to have that
Absolutely.
hope. I think what's hard is that in the meantime, people are still dying and you're still seeing that the this person died because of the one thing you have in common with them. And
Hmm.
that's what is hard, right? That's what continues to have an impact. And I think as far as Black mental health goes, really pick your battles with it, right? Do what you need to do. You brought up a great point. Disengage if you need to, right?
Yeah.
um, don't get engaged. It doesn't mean that you're not, for the community. It doesn't mean that you're not for progress. It just means I literally cannot see this anymore. This is damage. This is affecting my quality of life to continue to see this. And I'm not going to be a good brother, a good sister in this community if I continue to just delve into this, right?
Yeah, because it
Um,
it impacts everything else, like it impacts how you interact with your family, how you impact in your workplace. Like, I think God. And I feel for the people who were working during the time of George Floyd and all that disgustingness, all the stuff that was going on with the previous presidency, like just the images that we were seeing, the things that were getting going on that, you know, were not being addressed, were not being acknowledged, were not being punished, you
Mhm.
know, and to still have to go and sit in the face of the people who are not talking about it. They're just
Yeah.
talking about, oh, where did you go last weekend? What do you, how, and it's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to talk about, if I was in that position, I would not want to talk about anything other than, do y'all see what's going on? Like, is it
Yeah.
just me? You
Yeah.
know, and I feel for the people who are in these white spaces, you know, because when you are, like, I used to work in the corporate setting. When you are in those settings, they trying to, like, there's a culture to it. And if you don't
Yes.
get with the culture, you're the one who's messing up. You know, there's something wrong with you, not the other way around. Not realizing that we are not, we're not slaves, you know, to whatever you think I'm supposed to be like, or how I'm supposed to show up, or how I'm supposed to feel. We are ruled by our emotions and our mental
Absolutely.
health, you know, like it's all related. So
Mhm. That
I,
was a big growing point for me, I think, with the Michael Brown situation when that
mhm,
first happened years ago. You know, I was in a corporate setting, corporate, and I was actually, you know, I was in a company that, you know, for the most part was fairly liberal and diverse. You know, mental health tends to be a little more liberal,
yeah,
working with a lot of communities that it would make sense that we talk about that. And even in that space, I felt that like, you know, Chantel, you're talking about this too much. But I
mhm,
needed to like,
get it
like
out.
what's going on? Like, oh my God, like they just killed a kid. You know what I mean? Like I felt like I needed to talk about it with people, but because at the end of the day, no matter how liberal, you know, it's a corporate, predominantly white space.
Hmm.
Um, I realized pretty quickly, oh, I even though it's like that, I don't have the room here to do that. This isn't the
Yeah.
space for that. And it was hard for me
It,
at that time.
I believe it. I believe it because it's kind of like a shock. It's a
Yeah. Oh,
shock, you
that
know,
was
and it's like you're looking around like, is anybody else feeling what I'm feeling? You know,
yes.
is
Yeah.
anybody else struggling to be here right now?
Yes. And
Struggling to keep,
it's such a big thing that it's kind of like it feels like this is bigger than being black. Like they are out here really killing people. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God. And
yeah.
then like you realize no, it, it's a you issue. It's your issue, right? It's our community's issue. And it brings it back to, you know, this is what's going on in our community. When you go into those spaces and you have that shock, you're like, oh my gosh, and you try and like talk about it openly and vent. And it's just kind of like, you know, it's sympathy, it's empathy, but it's like, okay, you know, like, you know,
Yeah,
um,
what are you gonna do? Like, come on, man.
exactly
Like
the reminder.
that doesn't help anybody feel better. You know, that's dismissive and it's
No,
not I think that's where we kind of need to lead towards, like, is like having these spaces to talk about things, because sometimes just hearing somebody else say exactly how you feel makes you feel better. You know, it
right?
makes you feel normalized, like you're not crazy for feeling the way that you feel, or you're not outrageous or angry, you know, maybe you are angry. Maybe we have a
I
right
think
to be angry, you know?
just validating, you know, your perception, validating your experience around it, you know, and it and I get it on some extent because it's like, can you really validate it? This experience as a non-black person, I don't know because you know I am black. So I really don't know if you can honestly authentically validate it, just not having that experience, not necessarily having that threat in your life, you know?
Mhm.
So I don't know. But that's kind of where the need for more clinicians of color, more people of color in these spaces are needed. With the Michael Brown situation, you know, I kind of got the, you know, we're sorry, Chantal. Okay, okay. pretty quick in my day. I was waiting
Mm,
all day for my coworker to get to work who is Black. So I could go into her office and be like, oh my God, like to really just vent. And when she got there, it's exactly what we did. We spent the rest
yeah.
of the day just like, what are we gonna do? Like in just a panic in her office. And honestly, after that, I left feeling a little lighter versus,
Mhm.
my coworker my office mate who tried her best to really support me in that moment, but just I really feel like she just wasn't capable to validate experience that she just has no frame of reference to.
Yeah.
So
And sometimes talking to those type of people can be a little off-putting because it's like they don't understand. They can't understand because they haven't been in that situation or haven't had to go through the generations that our generations have, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
I get that. I completely understand. I know you don't have too much time. I want to ask you one do you have one book or two books that you recommend everybody read to help with dealing with your own personal health, or even something about Black trauma, or anything like that?
Oh, let me see. One book that was helpful right now. I'm reading like just reading a bunch of books pertaining to my field. I'm into something called like somatic experiencing right now, which is
Mhm.
basically it's short form using the physical manifestation of your trauma to heal your trauma. So that's y'all don't got to go there if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Let me go to my list. A book that was recommended to me was actually recommended. It's an old book. So just off the bat, um, for oh my goodness, here we go. There's positive affirmations for Black women. I do a lot of Audible.
Okay.
So off the bat, positive affirmations for Black women by Kalisha Harrington. And then where is it? Um, so that's off the bat. I think that's just, that's on brand right now. And I do like that book. And then something that I go back to a lot is You Can Heal Your Life by Louise L. Hay.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
You can
yeah,
heal. You can
yeah.
heal. I got you.
I love that, but I listen to it when I'm down and just kind of it's not like clinical. It's by no means she's not a clinician, but it's very powerful. And then Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. That is a big perspective book for me. Kind of the experience of this person and what they went through during the Holocaust, and the way they were going through such earth-shattering trauma, and the way they made it out the other side through just perspective and humor, honestly,
Mhm.
powerful. So those are my books, outside of my super, textbooky things right now. I need to do better about reading for fun. I'll add that to my self-care.
I understand. I understand. I feel the same. I'm like, I need to get back into my novels, like reading
Yeah.
the good like stories that I can relate to, because it was easy in high school because it's so much young adult fiction, but in the adult fiction world it's not as much. Like even if you look into like Black literature, like it's a lot of gangs and violence and nasty, and I can't always relate,
Yeah.
sometimes. But
Yeah.
before we head out, how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in just maybe learning more about your journey or seeking therapy from you?
Yeah. So Instagram, just like that, the Happy Black Therapist. I'm the only one. So reach out to me. If emails your jam info at Happy Black Therapist. please reach out to me. Um, yeah, info at Happy Black Therapist. No the on the email. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Right now I'm in a bit of transition, so it's crazy. This week I haven't been putting out a lot of content, but even if it's just checking me out and just you want to laugh, a funny reel, or you need some inspiration or just whatever it might be, please don't hesitate to reach out. Facebook, same thing, got the Facebook page going.
Hmm.
Just really trying to start this movement of making, there's so much generational trauma in various communities of color. And, just wanting to create a safe space. That's all. That's all.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we appreciate you for doing that, and I
Thank
appreciate you
you
so much for coming on.
so much. This
I
was
really This is
awesome.
a great interview. I'm glad we talked about what we talked about. I know it's gonna hit home with a lot of people, so thank you again. I will let you know once everything is official, okay?
Yay. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I need the content. So
No problem, no worries. Alright, you have a great rest of your week, okay?
you take care.
Alright, bye.
Bye.